Most people fail with container ginger for one simple reason. They treat it like a root that wants to dive down, when ginger is really a creeping stem that wants to travel sideways, stay warm, and keep making itself longer. That one misunderstanding leads to almost every frustrating result people complain about. Tiny harvests, rotten pieces, pale shoots that never amount to much, pots full of leaves and almost nothing worth digging. And then they decide ginger just doesn't grow well in containers. It does. In fact, for a lot of people, containers are one of the smartest ways to grow it. You get control over warmth, moisture, soil texture, feeding, and harvest timing, but only if you stop asking the wrong question. The wrong question is, how deep should I plant ginger? The better question is, how do I create a wide, warm, loose runway for it to keep moving and swelling? Once you see that, everything changes. Your pot choice changes, your soil mix changes, the way you water changes, even the way you think about harvest changes. And that is usually the difference between digging up a handful of stringy little knobs and lifting a fat, branching cluster that actually feels worth the season. A lot of new growers start with a deep decorative pot because it looks serious. They bury a whole grocery store hand of ginger several inches down, soak the soil because they've heard tropical plants love water, set it somewhere they think is bright enough, and wait. Then they wait longer. Maybe a sprout comes. Maybe it sulks. Maybe the original piece softens before it ever takes off. None of that is bad luck. It is just the plant telling you, in its own quiet way, that you set up the wrong kind of house. Ginger is not trying to become a carrot. It is not trying to punch a single root down through cool, wet soil. The part you eat is a rhizome, a thickened underground stem, and it grows by extending horizontally, sending shoots upward and roots downward from those joints as it goes. That means the best container is usually not the deepest one you own. It is the one that gives ginger room to run. Width matters more than drama. Warmth matters more than volume. Air in the mix matters more than richness alone. If you miss that principle, you can do 10 other things right and still end up disappointed. So let's correct the whole picture from the ground up. Because once you understand what ginger is actually doing under the soil, the practical steps stop feeling random. They start making sense. First, start with the right piece, because a weak beginning echoes through the whole season. You want plump ginger with visible growth buds, those little eyes or pointed nubs on the surface. Fresh, firm, heavy in the hand. Not shriveled, not moldy. Not cut up into dry, lifeless chunks that have been sitting too long. Grocery store ginger can work, and plenty of people use it successfully, but you do want the liveliest piece you can find. If you can get seed ginger from a grower or nursery, even better, because it is often selected and handled with planting in mind. Still, the real point is not where it came from. The point is whether it still has energy stored in it. A lot of people plant one giant uncut hand because it feels like more ginger should mean more harvest. Sometimes that works, but often it wastes space and crowds the container before the plant even gets going. Better is usually to divide large pieces into sections, each with 2 or 3 healthy buds. Not tiny scraps, not a dozen skinny slivers. Solid pieces with enough body to feed the first burst of growth. Then let those cut surfaces dry for a day or two in a shaded, airy place so they can callus a little. That small pause can reduce the chance of rot, especially if your spring weather is still cool. Here's another mistake that costs people weeks. Planting before the ginger is really ready to move. You can put dormant pieces in soil and hope, or you can wake them first. Pre-sprouting is not mandatory, but it gives you a real advantage. Set the pieces somewhere warm, not scorching, with decent airflow. Some people use a tray with barely moist medium. Some use a paper bag in a warm room. Some simply keep the pieces on a plate where they can watch the buds swell. The method matters less than the warmth. Ginger likes to wake up when conditions feel steady and safe. If your house or greenhouse is still chilly at night, the plant reads that as hesitation. When the buds start to push and green tips appear, you have momentum on your side. Now the container. This is where the central correction really pays off. Pick a pot that is broad enough for sideways growth. You do not need a tree tub, but you do want more width than most people assume. Something around 12 inches deep can be enough, but the width should let you space pieces several inches apart and still leave room for the rhizomes to travel outward. A shallow raised trough, a wide grow bag, a storage tote with drainage holes, a half barrel, even a sturdy plastic tub can work if it drains well. Ginger does not care whether the container looks expensive. It cares whether the space stays warm, loose, and never waterlogged. That last part matters because the phrase tropical plant tricks people into overwatering. Tropical does not mean swampy. In the wild, ginger often grows in rich, loose soil, with regular moisture, yes, but also warmth, oxygen, and drainage. A cold, wet pot is not tropical. It is suffocation. If your mix stays heavy and soggy, the rhizome can sit there like a buried sponge, and once rot gets into it, the season can be over before it starts. So build the soil for moisture balance, not mud. A good container mix for ginger should hold enough water to stay evenly moist, but still open up with air. Think high-quality potting mix improved with compost and something coarse like perlite, pine bark fines, or coconut coir, depending on what you have. You want a mix that feels springy and crumbly, not greasy and dense. If you squeeze a wet handful, it should hold shape lightly, then break apart with a poke. Too much straight compost can compact. Too much garden soil can turn a pot into a brick. Too much peat without structure can go from soggy to bone dry. The goal is not a recipe carved in stone. The goal is a texture that supports expansion. And when you fill the container, don't pack it down hard. Ginger is one of those crops that rewards a little restraint, firm enough to settle the mix, loose enough that the rhizomes can swell and creep without fighting their own bed. Planting depth is another place where people overdo it. Because they think underground crop, they bury it like a bulb. But ginger wants to sit fairly near the surface. Lay each piece horizontally with the buds pointing up or sideways, then cover it with just a couple inches of mix, enough to protect it. Not so much that emerging shoots have to struggle through a cold blanket of soil. Remember the plant's habit. It wants to travel just below the surface line, not at the bottom of a well. Spacing matters too. If you jam too many seed pieces into one container, you create competition before the plant has even established a rhythm. Leaves crowd. Airflow drops. Rhizomes bump into each other too early. It feels efficient at planting time and stingy at harvest. Give each piece some room. You are not planting for a cute full pot in June. You are planting for a heavy pot in late season. Once planted, water the mix in thoroughly one time to settle everything, then back off. This is where patience becomes a real gardening skill. Before the shoots are up and actively growing, ginger does not need the same level of moisture it will need later. The soil should not dry to dust, but it also should not stay dripping wet while the rhizome is still deciding whether to root and push. Early on, too much love looks a lot like rot. That is one of the hardest lessons for enthusiastic growers, because doing less can feel like neglect. With ginger, restraint in the beginning often earns abundance later. As growth begins, give it warmth whenever you can. This is not a crop that forgives cold indifference. If nights are still cool where you live, keep the container somewhere protected, or start indoors and move it out only when true warmth settles in. Ginger can survive slower conditions, but survive is not the same as yield. If your goal is a huge harvest, you want the plant spending as much of the season as possible in active growth, rather than merely hanging on. Warm roots, warm days, and protection from sharp chills make a bigger difference than many fertilizers ever will. Light matters, but this is another place where people flatten the advice into something too simple. Some hear tropical and assume deep shade. Others hear edible crop and put it in punishing all-day sun against a hot wall. Ginger usually does best with bright light, gentle morning sun, or filtered sun, especially in hot climates where container soil can heat and dry too fast. In milder places, it may take more sun. The real rule is to watch the plant and the pot together. If the leaves scorch and the mix dries out every few hours, that is not a badge of productivity. If the plant stays weak and stretched in dim gloom, that is not kindness either. Aim for strong, steady growth, not stress from either direction. Now here is the stronger principle that replaces all the guesswork. Ginger yields well when you keep it moving. Not rushing, moving. Every choice should support continued rhizome expansion and healthy leaf growth over a long, warm season. That means consistent moisture once established. It means regular feeding, because container crops run through resources faster than garden beds. It means adding soil or mulch as the rhizomes inch outward near the surface. It means not shocking the plant with feast or famine care. Let's talk feeding, because this is where a lot of container ginger stays pretty, but never gets substantial. Those leafy shoots are not the final prize, but they are the engines. More healthy leaves generally mean more power being sent down to build the rhizomes. So after active growth begins, feed modestly but regularly. Compost in the mix helps. A diluted liquid feed every few weeks can help. A balanced organic fertilizer, used lightly and consistently, can help. What usually fails is the all-or-nothing approach. Either the plant gets nothing and slowly coasts on its starting reserves, or it gets hammered with strong fertilizer and sulks in a salt-heavy pot. Gentle, regular nutrition supports the long game. Potassium and overall plant health matter for swelling rhizomes, but don't get trapped chasing some magic bottle. The biggest gains usually come from the basics done well: warmth, season length, root space, even moisture, and a mix the plant can actually breathe in. People love special tricks because tricks are exciting. Ginger loves steadiness because steadiness works. There is also a quiet little move that can increase your harvest if you understand why you're doing it. As the rhizomes develop near the surface, you can top dress with more compost or potting mix, almost the way you would gently hill a crop without burying the plant too deeply. Why? Because exposed rhizomes can green, dry, or harden in unhelpful ways, and covering them lightly gives them fresh territory to keep expanding into. Again, you are working with the growth habit, not against it. You are extending the runway. Mulch can help too, especially in hot, dry weather. A light organic mulch can moderate surface temperature and slow moisture loss. That matters because container ginger hates wild swings. It hates being soaked Monday, baked Wednesday, and flooded again Friday. Those swings stall growth, and every stall costs you size. Not always visibly in the moment. Sometimes the leaves still look decent, but below the surface, the plant has stopped building with confidence. If you really want a huge yield, think in terms of time as much as care. Ginger is not a quick radish. It rewards a long season. In many climates, the growers who harvest the most are the ones who start early in warmth, protect the plants from cold setbacks, and stretch the season on both ends if possible. An extra few good weeks can mean a lot more rhizome. That is why container growing is so useful. You can start sooner under cover. You can move pots. You can shield the crop when weather turns. Mobility is not just convenience, it is leverage. Now let's deal with the disappointment many people have halfway through the season. The plant looks fine above ground, but they tug around in the soil and don't feel some giant treasure yet, so they assume it is failing. This is another misunderstanding. Ginger builds gradually. Early on, you may have plenty of green growth before the rhizomes have really bulked up. If you keep disturbing the container, digging around, checking, lifting, and recovering, you interrupt the very thing you want. A curious hand can steal more yield than a minor nutrient mistake. Better to watch the vigor of the shoots, maintain the conditions, and let the plant keep its momentum. That said, one of the pleasures of ginger is that you do not have to think about harvest in only one way. Young ginger, the tender pale kind with thin skin, can be taken earlier in the season once the plant has made enough fresh growth. It is juicy, fragrant, easy to slice, and wonderful in the kitchen. If you carefully remove a little from the edge while leaving the main plant intact, you can enjoy some early without ending the whole crop. Mature ginger, on the other hand, needs more time to firm and swell. So the definition of huge yield is not just one final weigh-in. It can also mean how much useful ginger the container gives you over time. Still, if your goal is that satisfying late harvest, resist pulling too soon. As long as the plant has warmth and healthy leaves, it is still converting the season into storage. Toward the end, as temperatures cool and growth slows, the foliage may begin to yellow. That is your sign that the cycle is shifting. Then you can tip the container or dig carefully and see what your months of discipline created. A good harvest from a container often looks like a branching hand of smooth, swollen pieces, not one giant lump. And when it happens, you'll notice something important. It rarely comes from the deepest pot or the fanciest system. It comes from a grower who understood the plant's direction. Let's correct a few more habits that quietly shrink container harvests. One is choosing black containers in brutal heat, without thinking through the consequence. In some climates, they work fine. In others, they turn the root zone into an oven by afternoon. Ginger likes warmth, yes, but stressed roots in superheated pot walls are not the same thing as a stable tropical bed. If your summers are intense, insulating the pot, using a lighter-colored container, or placing the pot where the container itself is shaded while the leaves still get good light, can make a real difference. Another is letting the plant become root-bound with weeds or companion plants jammed into the same space because the pot looks bare. I understand the temptation. A container with open soil invites us to tuck in something else. But ginger uses that surface territory. It wants breathing room and access to moisture and feed. Packing the pot with shallow companions may look productive and feel thrifty, but often it turns into competition you do not need. Another mistake is assuming every yellow leaf means hunger and every droop means thirst. Sometimes yes. Sometimes it means the pot stayed too wet and the roots are unhappy. Sometimes it means a cold snap slowed uptake. Sometimes it means the plant is simply aging normally. Good growers are not just people who react quickly. They are people who read context before reacting. That may be the most useful self-reliant skill in any garden. Not more products, better judgment. If pests show up, deal with them early, but don't let fear take over the whole crop. Container ginger is not usually the most pest-ridden plant in a garden, but spider mites, aphids, or gnats can appear, especially in protected spaces. Strong plant health and airflow go a long way. Soggy sour mix invites trouble, so again, many problems circle back to the same correction. The plant wants lively conditions, not stagnant ones. And here is something people almost never say out loud when they talk about high yields. A huge harvest is relative to the space, the season, and the climate you're working with. Chasing a photo from somebody in a long tropical season when you live with a short summer can make you feel like you failed when you actually did well. The smarter goal is not to copy someone else's exact result. It is to get close to the upper limit of what your conditions can support. Containers help because they let you bend those conditions in your favor, but they do not repeal climate. What they do is hand more of the decision-making back to you. That is one reason growing ginger in a container feels so satisfying when you finally get it right. You are not just harvesting a spice, you are proving that careful observation beats lazy assumptions. You are learning to stop treating plants like labels and start treating them like living habits. Ginger says, very plainly, if you take the time to understand how I move, I will reward you. If you bury me deep, drown me early, chill me often, and crowd me tight, I will survive if I can, but I will not give you much. There is a larger lesson in that, and it reaches past this one crop. A lot of wasted effort in gardening comes from forcing a plant into the picture we had in our head, instead of adjusting to the way the plant actually grows. We hear root and imagine downward. We hear tropical and imagine water. We hear container and imagine smaller harvest by default. Ginger challenges all three. It asks for sideways room, warm consistency, and patient management. Once you understand that, container growing stops looking like a compromise and starts looking like a strategy. If I had to boil the whole thing down to one sentence, it would be this: stop trying to bury ginger and start trying to host it. Give it a broad bed, give it heat, give it a loose, fed, breathing mix. Keep it steadily growing for as long as your season allows. Protect that momentum, then let the plant do what it already wants to do. And if you've struggled with ginger before, don't write yourself off as someone who just can't grow it. Plenty of failed containers were set up on bad assumptions, not bad intentions. Once the principle clicks, the process gets simpler. Not effortless, but simpler. You stop fussing over depth. You stop worshiping giant pots for their own sake. You stop pouring water every time you feel anxious. You start reading the leaves, the warmth, the pace, and the soil surface. You start growing with the plant instead of merely tending a pot. That is when bigger harvests usually begin, not when you discover a miracle trick. When you stop making the main mistake. One more correction is worth making, especially for people who buy one small piece at the store, plant it, and expect a bucketful by fall. Ginger multiplies, but it multiplies by building from what you give it. Bigger starting pieces with healthy buds usually produce stronger early shoots. Stronger shoots feed larger rhizomes, so if you are serious about yield, do not think only about the final container. Think about your starting stock as stored fuel. You are not cheating by choosing a vigorous piece. You are giving the season something to work with. And save your best pieces at harvest if you can. The nicest, healthiest sections from a container that performed well are often the smartest pieces to replant next time. That is how home growers quietly improve their results year after year. Not by chasing novelty every spring, but by selecting from what already proved itself in their own conditions. A plant raised in your climate, under your watering habits, in your container system, is already teaching you what fits. There is real practical wisdom in paying attention to that. Also, do not underestimate warmth under the pot itself. Setting a container on cold concrete early in the season can slow things more than people realize. A rolling stand, wooden slats, gravel, or any setup that keeps the pot from sitting on a cold slab can help the root zone warm more evenly. That sounds like a small detail. Sometimes small details are exactly where a mediocre harvest turns into a very good one. And if your season is short, do not be embarrassed to treat ginger almost like a portable summer stove project. Start it early indoors, move it into the warmest stretch of the year, and bring it back under shelter before nights turn sharp. That flexibility is not fussiness, it is simply smart container growing for most climates. So if you plant ginger this season, remember what it is: a sideways grower, a warm season builder, a plant that rewards consistency more than intensity. And if you already grow it, I'd love to know which mattered more in your experience: wider containers, earlier starts, or getting the watering under control. Because